Chapter 5. A Providence of Angels. The following Sunday, Clara returned from morning service to an empty house, her heart saddened by another Sabbath that Nathan had spent alone in his workshop. The empty seat beside her in church drew more whispers as each week passed. Even Reverend Pembroke had stopped asking after her husband, though his sermon, focusing on the downfall that follows pride, caused several glances in her direction. She unbuttoned her wool coat with the modest fur collar she'd saved for all last winter, hanging it on the peg beside Nathan's unworn Sunday suit jacket, still crisp from the dry goods shop in Pittsfield. Each morning she tended to the angel, packing fresh snow into its wind-worn hollows, flattening its edges where frost roughed them. The angel stood clear and faithful, a testament to things that endure after the moment of their making. Clara contemplated the meaning of faith, of Nathan's faith that had once run so deep he'd carved chapel doors without payment in his effort to give glory to God. He worked late into the night, declaring that every wood carving was a kind of prayer. At present, his prayers were silent. She glimpsed a tiny figure trudging up the hillside path, a slim young boy, no older than 7, bundled in a tattered coat that had endured too many winters. "Miss Clara?" he asked when he reached her, his accent marking him as one of the mill families who'd moved up from Rhode Island seeking jobs. "Why, Peter?" She noted how his coat sleeves had grown too short, and his boots were stuffed with newspaper where the leather cracked. His cheeks were rosy from the Massachusetts cold. "What brings you by today?" He shuffled his feet on the porch boards Nathan had laid 5 summers back. "My ma sent me to ask." Peter twisted his cap. "She's been real sick, Miss Clara, and with the textile mill cutting everyone's hours." "Your mother hasn't been to church." Clara recalled the empty pew where Mrs. Patrick Kelly usually sat. The Ladies' Aid Society should have been told she was ill. The boy ducked his head. A woolen muffler, darned at both ends, provided scant protection from the January gusts biting at his face. The sight of him bore down on Clara's chest, and she lit a kerosene lamp and brought him inside. "Let me pack some food for you." As she occupied herself pulling out yesterday's bread and preserved peaches, she realized that Nathan's tools had gone silent in his workshop. Since the rejection, he'd retreated there as a hermit to his cave, working rather than attending worship. The irony didn't escape her, how he turned from carving church altars to hiding from God's house. A few minutes later, he stepped inside, shavings of walnut and oak wood on his sleeve. He'd been experimenting with different woods for the Henderson cradle, though he'd never admit to such uncertainty. His dark brows furrowed as he observed Peter Kelly warming his hands by their old Monarch cook stove in use for heating despite the electric stove in the corner. "Peter?" he asked, catching Clara's worried glance. "Everything all right at home?" "No, sir," Peter whispered, studying the battered toes of his boots. "Ma's sick, and the mill." Clara counted 2 jars of apple butter in the basket she was assembling. More and more families were struggling. Even so, few proud Yankees admitted it. "His family's had a hard season," she said. "I'm sending him home with food." "Your folks in that White House beyond the mill bridge, Peter?" Nathan asked. The boy nodded, his blue-eyed gaze locking onto the intricate leaf pattern decorating the kitchen cabinets. "It's just me and Ma. Pa never came back from France." He touched the carving with one chapped finger. "Never seen leaves look so real in wood before." He traced the pattern with the same reverence she'd previously observed in her husband, the recognition of splendor tucked within ordinary moments. Nathan hesitated in the doorway, his shoulders tense with the familiar pride that had led to his isolation. But something in Peter's innocent wonder at the carvings seemed to reach him. She saw it in the slight softening around his eyes, the way his hands unclenched at his sides. When he knelt to meet the boy's gaze, the rigid mask that had calcified around his features cracked, revealing hints of his former tender spirit. He stood and retrieved his coat. "I'll walk you home and make sure your ma's got enough firewood." Clara blinked. Since the Bradford commission, Nathan stayed in his workshop, making his deliveries at dawn or dusk to avoid neighbors' eyes, where judgment waited on every corner. "You don't have to," she began. "I want to," Nathan said firmly. Assisting Peter, buttoning his thin coat, his craftsman's fingers moving with the attention he'd once given to his finest pieces. Then he stepped out with the boy and basket of food. They disappeared down the snowy road, two figures shrinking beyond the white hills. Margaret crossed the yard with Thomas, their breaths clouding in the air. Her usual fluid stride had grown brittle, each step meticulously taken, as if she feared the ground she walked on. Through the kitchen window, Clara caught fragments of their conversation. "The world's changing whether we like it or not," Margaret was saying, her city-cultured voice conveying a note of uncertainty Clara had never heard before. "Doesn't mean we have to lose who or what we were," Thomas replied. "Look at what Father managed to do with that cradle design, preserving tradition while embracing innovation." Margaret's gloved hand tightened on her brother's arm, as if steadying herself against more than the winter wind. Clara grazed the letter in her apron pocket, the one that had arrived that morning from Boston, bearing the State House seal. The thick paper crackled beneath her fingers like frost-covered leaves. Inside lay an invitation that might alter their course, if only they were courageous enough. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same Massachusetts Historical Society that had sided with the Bradfords now sought Nathan's pieces for their exhibition of heritage crafts. Such recognition could restore his name, but it could also reopen barely healed wounds. She couldn't bring herself to show him the letter yet, not today, not with Thomas and Margaret approaching. She'd wait until she found the appropriate moment, the appropriate words to help him see it as redemption rather than charity. Nathan and Peter disappeared further down the snowy road, two figures shrinking beyond the white hills. Sometimes angels showed up in unexpected forms, in snow and wood, in bread shared with strangers, in brothers learning to build bridges instead of walls, even in a boy's tiny finger, tracking patterns that once hinted at heaven's artistry in a world too hungry for a blessing. Clara pressed a hand to her waist. The familiar queasiness had intensified. The timing seemed providential, as Nathan gradually rediscovered beauty, while new life flourished within her. But as the letter was in her pocket, this news would wait until Nathan's heart was ready to receive it. Tomorrow, Clara decided she would return to the schoolhouse where she taught reading to the mill children whenever she was able. The position paid little, scarcely adequate when Nathan's commissions grew sparse, though the job gave her purpose. Recently, climbing the steps left her breathless, and the chalk dust that had never bothered her before twisted her stomach. A cry from outdoors broke her thoughts. The afternoon shadows had barely lengthened since Nathan and Peter's departure when she hurried to the porch. There, she found Peter's mother, Mrs. Kelly, supported between Margaret and Thomas, the woman's face gray beneath a fever flush. Clara recognized the desperate determination of a mother who must have tried following her son despite her illness, making it only part way before her strength failed her. "She was scarcely standing when we saw her," Thomas explained as he helped Mrs. Kelly inside. Clara gestured to the road. "Her son is with Nathan, heading to an empty house," I'll catch them before... As Thomas swiveled, Nathan and Peter appeared, the boy's face draining of color at the sight of his mother slumped in Clara's kitchen chair. He dropped the food and ran to her. "Ma?" "We saw them," Nathan clarified to Clara's questioning glance. His grip tightened on Peter's shoulders, and his expression changed, as if the boy's fear had stirred awake the father he might have been. "The doctor," he said. "I'll fetch him." "Your brother can go." "I'll go." Nathan strode out. "Let him." Thomas helped Mrs. Kelly into the parlor while Clara steeped tea from her precious store. Margaret knelt before the sick woman, her leather gloves discarded, her urban demeanor forgotten, as she laid a cool hand on Mrs. Kelly's burning forehead. "The milk huts weren't about ours, were they?" she asked. "They stopped the company doctor visits, too." Mrs. Kelly's eyes, Irish blue despite her pallor, gleamed with tears. Her wool coat, missing 2 buttons, hung on her frame as a memory of better days, while beneath it her dark serge dress bore the careful darning of a woman who'd learned to make do. "We couldn't afford medicine since my George..." She glanced at the family photographs on Clara's parlor wall, swiveling away from such evidence of intact families. "Since Bello would." The telegram had come about George in 18, his life given alongside so many other New England men in the brutal June battle at Belleau Wood. Clara remembered the day it arrived, how Mrs. Kelly had stood in her doorway clutching the yellow paper, while the newspaper headlines proclaimed victory in the wheat fields of France. The papers detailed the Marines advancing through machine gun fire, of ground gained inch by bloody inch, though they never mentioned how the war would continue claiming victims years later, as wives like Mrs. Kelly fought their own battles against poverty and illness in these New England hills. Nathan brought word that Dr. Campbell had been called to a difficult birth in the neighboring village. Fortunately, Mrs. Kelly had rallied, color restored in her cheeks as she sipped Clara's willow bark tea. Thomas stoked the fireplace, reigniting the flames, while Margaret and Peter perched beside her. Nathan watched his siblings. "She'll be all right." With that, he returned to his workshop. From her place near the stove, Clara glimpsed him. Light spilled from his lamp, outlining his strong physique as he bent over the Henderson cradle. His hands moved with a different purpose, and she recognized the pattern emerging beneath his chisel, the exquisite scrollwork he was famous for, but also clean lines that spoke of strength, of endurance. Some beauty came from necessity, when mercy met human need. Perhaps this was what her snow angel had been anticipating, when art served love, when pride bowed to purpose. In the meantime, Clara had decisions about the letter, about the precious bundle growing within her, about the school board meeting next week, held in the town hall, where they would discuss reducing her hours to save money. At present, she would do what women had always done in this house. She would put the kettle on, send Thomas to his home for more blankets, and let Margaret's city-trained fingers and country heart tend to their neighbor. An hour later, in the dark, Nathan emerged from his workshop holding a wooden object wrapped in cloth. He entered the house, his boots leaving snowmelt patterns on the floor she'd swept that morning. Without sparing anyone a word, he crossed to where Peter sat in a chair beside his mother. With hands that trembled slightly, though only Clara seemed to notice, he placed the object in the boy's hands. A simple cup, carved from cherry wood. Along its rim, tiny wings took flight, sturdy yet displaying the elegance of his former work. Clara recognized in those wings the same pattern on their church's doorway, back when Nathan carved prayers into the wood. Though these wings were different, less ornate, but somehow more alive, as if they'd learned a lesson about trust from having first been broken. "For broth," Nathan said, the words abrupt, as if they cost him something to say. Your mother will need her strength. Clara watched her husband tend to Mrs. Kelly, seeing how helping others had begun to soften his hardened spirit. Perhaps this softening was God's way of preparing him for what lay ahead, both the invitation and the other news she carried. Beyond the glass, the snow angel stood. Moonlight highlighted each curve, though now nature itself seemed to have taken over her work. New fallen snow followed the path of each wing with an artistry surpassing her own until the angel appeared to soar from the earth rather than perch upon it. Clara pressed her fingertips to the cold window, seeing in that silvered form a reflection of what was happening in her own home, how grace could reshape what pride had frozen. The angel offered a quiet benediction over them all, the fevered mother finding rest by the fire, the boy cradling a cup as if it contained more than promises of broth, Margaret and Thomas standing awkward yet together, and Nathan, who was rediscovering how to weave kindness and craft into a single enduring gift.